Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's stream. This is a recorded video with our friend 𝐒𝐚𝐧 𝐒𝐿. Today is the 25th of June, 2025, and this is an update, analysis, and commentary about the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Iran. And 𝐒𝐚𝐧 had a very in-depth analysis and a very insightful commentaries in the last participation on Syriana Analysis, and his name popped up several times during the live chat. People were calling to invite him back, and I truly believe that his insight today is going to be exceptional because he has been one of the very few thinking critically about what's happening inside his country and also in the region, something that we truly love on Syriana Analysis because we're here on a learning path to learn more what's happening in Iran. 𝐒𝐚𝐧, thank you so much for coming to the show again.
Thank you for inviting me to your show.
Guys, 𝐒𝐚𝐧's X account and also his Telegram account are both in the description below, so it would be great to follow him to stay update about what's happening not only in Iran but also on the broader geopolitical scheme of things. 𝐒𝐚𝐧, I would like to start this conversation with you with I have been following the statements of both officials in Israel and Iran, and both sides claim to have won this 12-day war. I would like to hear your evaluation of the wins and the failures of both sides in Tehran and Tel Aviv.
Well, first of all, let me start with my own country. I do not like the fact that right after the declaration of, one-sided declaration of ceasefire, because there seemed to be no contact with the Iranian officials from the American side to notify them. They just took it into the social media, and basically the Iranian foreign minister said that, well, if they stop attacking us, we will stop retaliating against those attacks. I don't like the fact that right after that declaration of ceasefire by Donald Trump, the next day at 6 o'clock Tehran times, people gathered in a big square in the streets and celebrated, which they did because of the proclamation of the Iranian government, right? So I don't like that at all. I think that the enemy should have been punished, and I do believe that it wasn't punished because I was seeing a poll. 66% of the Israelis believe that the war should have continued. So it's questionable whether you have punished them enough, to say the least. I'm being generous here.
Yeah.
But with regards to actual things that have happened, I think that, there are damages that were done to each country that were substantial. The facilities in Natanz nuclear sites, the ones that were above the ground, they were destroyed. The ones that were in the ground, they were also destroyed because Natanz was the least secure Iranian nuclear facility. We expected it to happen. That's why Iran went on and built Fordo. And, we have a facility that is even more fortified than Fordo. It is buried deeper under the ground, and that's really secure. They were not able to damage Fordo. They were not able to damage the other facility that is, more under the ground. But they were able to. I'm referring to the Natanz pilot facility for those who are going to check. But Natanz facility was destroyed, right? And that's the damage that was done to Iran. In that facility, certain things were being done that were, in my opinion, were important. For example, the vacuum pumps necessary to build centrifuges were being built, and a whole host of other things. But I will come back and compare these things with what the Israelis lost. On the Israeli side, Iran targeted the Weizmann Institute. People can go and read the Times of Israel and see what a rather devastating blow Iran dealt to Israel, because This facility, it included, I think, 30 laboratories, and it was the lifetime work of these different scientists. In nature, I said that I'm going to compare it with what Iran lost. What the Israelis lost in this facility was, iterational improvements of genome research, DNA research, mRNA research, heart tissues. These are not something that you would have a scheme of, that you would be able to replicate. No, you have to use trial and error. So compared to what Iran lost, I would say that this is more.
Yes.
In terms of human loss of lives, 600 Iranians were killed in senseless and savage Israeli attack on Iran. On the other side, the Israelis only lost, I think, 25 or 28 Israelis. So in that category, there is obvious imbalance between what Iran lost and what the Israelis lost. But we have to talk about the grander scheme of things as well. What were the objectives of the Israelis in attacking Iran? Well, they had a very ambitious goal. They planned to, completely enact a regime change in Iran. And after that initial change, they planned to balkanize Iran in order to, for example, create a Kurdish state, for example, which would be beneficial to them. For anyone who thinks that Kurdish Israeli relations and collaborations are like some kind of hatred towards an independent Kurdish state, I suggest them to study the periphery doctrine of the Israelis, which means that, it has changed a little bit after 1979 revolution in Iran, but still the same principles hold. So, and by the way, there is a picture of Meir Dagan, former head of Mossad, meeting with the Kurdish president in Iraqi Kurdistan, Masoud Barzani. So, the evidence there is more than enough and more than convincing. But they planned to enact regime change. Their tactic in military is called blitzkrieg.
Yes.
It was a tactic that was invented ironically, by the Nazi Germany, and it seeks to prevent the enemy from regrouping.
Yes.
Right? That's the objective there. What the Israelis were doing is dismantling the command center, the command structure, through decapitation strikes.
Yes.
And they also, were suppressing the air defense systems of Iran, mostly through anti-tank guided missiles, which means that these air defense systems, in contrast to what people were saying, were actually destroyed from the ground, from within the Iran, under the ground. So what I really like to do is to dismantle this mystification of the Israeli air forces. I'm not saying that they don't have the F-35s. I don't say that their fighter jets didn't violate the Iranian territorial integrity. But it is very important that at the same time that you criticize your own country, you prevent from, turning something into a myth or a legend. This would be contrary and disheartening to anyone who is supportive of this policy of resistance towards the enemy. So a word of caution there. But let's talk about the interview that Yechiel Leiter, the Israeli ambassador to US, did. He said that once the dust settles, the people will find out about the surprises that were carried out on Friday and Saturday, the first 2 days of war, that will make the pager operation almost seem simple. Yeah. What is he trying to do there? He's flexing about Mossad's prowess, not the capabilities of the Israeli military. Very important. What Israel did, what the Mossad did very successfully, was to smuggle a a rather sizable cargo of anti-tank guided missile Spike that were modified to work through internet and Starlink satellites to dismantle the Iranian air defense systems, and it was very successful, I have to say. I didn't think that Iran would be able to recover this quickly, because in less than 18 hours, Iran actually not only reappointed those generals that were assassinated through the decapitation strikes, but also carried out the retaliation of its own.
Yes.
What Israelis wanted to do through the Blitzkrieg operation, because you have to understand, it's a very demanding military tactic. There is a reason why all the militaries don't use it, because it puts a strain on your forces. You use a vast array of your assets in order to put a hurt on your enemy. What they thought in their calculus was that by doing this, they will be able to create an illusion of a collapsed state. That's why they carried out the attack on the Iranian IRIB, the state-owned media of Iran. I heard one of them saying that, posted a tweet, a video of these Salafi Wahhabi jihadists inside Syria and how they control the state media and how this turned the tide on the Assad regime. So they planned to do the same thing in Iran. And their main goal was to bring people of Iran to the streets, to incite violence. And 100%. They wanted the Iranian people to do the heavy lifting for them.
Yes.
All those tactics, all those, sort of surprises were done effectively. Yes, I do agree. But ultimately, it's not enough to bring an enemy the size of Iran, 72 times as big as Israel, a country with a population of 92 million, and in contrast to Israel that has a population of 10 million people. There's a very stark contrast between the capabilities of these two countries. So their plan was to change regime in Iran, which ultimately we know failed. And that's why let me address your question directly here. In terms of the objectives that they set for themselves, in that regard, they failed, but the objective of the Iranian government was to protect the Iranian territorial integrity, to continue their enrichment, which, based on the fact that the attack on the Fordo facility was not successful, they achieved. But I think that the objective should have been punishing the Israelis. That's why I have been very critical of the Iranian strategy, and I did an interview with another journalist earlier, which, I used a certain rhetoric because I was really angry at, this failure in punishing the enemy. But I thought that I should maybe, even things out for the people who thought that I'm saying that Iran failed completely in its objectives. No, it didn't fail, but it didn't achieve what I personally wanted to see the Iranians do.
So the Iranian side's priority was to preserve its territorial integrity and to try to continue its enrichment of uranium. Those were main objectives. And I argued yesterday on my stream, and I said the goal, as you said, is not only regime change, it's also balkanization, because and the evidence for it is Israel and the United States have been trying to promote Reza Pahlavi as the future king of Iran. And I said, why did they pick Pahlavi? They specifically picked him because he's incompetent and he is a no one. And he has never managed a kindergarten. So how do you expect him to manage basically a nation of 92 million? This is all deliberate, bringing someone like him as incompetent as possible in order to mismanage, let's say, the different social components of the Iranian society. And this would lead eventually into tensions among these components, disintegration of the Iranian nation. And this is very, very dangerous because Iran is a nation Unlike many other countries in the region, Iran is a nation. Iran is a civilization. It has a very long history in the region, and attacking such a nation and destroying its civilization, disintegration, will have enormous repercussions on the region and especially on human history, basically, of the region. And this is one of the things the empire is trying to do, is to erase the history, the civilization, the cultures, the languages. They did it in Syria. Why wouldn't they do it in Iran as well? And in this case, since we spoke about the shock factor, you already addressed the shock factor of Israel's war on Iran in the first few days. And we also spoke about some of the intelligence failures on Tehran's part in the first few days. You were critical of it. It's always raising this question why the countries or the players who challenge Israel do not focus enough on the intelligence aspect of it, right? Like, since the inception of Israel, you have stories after stories after stories of success stories, let's say, from the Israeli side against its enemies, intelligence successes, right? To the extent that one of their guys almost became the defense minister in Syria, Eli Cohen, and now one of their other guys, Eli Cohen 2.0, Jolani, has become the president of Syria. And so they really, how should I say, they have a special interest, let's say, in the intelligence affairs, unlike countries like Iran or Syria or the other players in the axis of resistance against Israel. And this always gives Israel the upper hand on these players, because they're reading, they are learning, they are listening, they're following, they have the GPS, they have the older spying machine. And now you mentioned also Starlink as part of this war. So it's difficult to match this. It's difficult to match the Israeli technological advance, especially that they have the US on their back.
You know, you actually brought a very good point, and this is a perfect segue for us to address, you know, the failure of the intelligence community inside Iran. Look, prior to the, I mean, on your previous show, I actually said that we are doing a lot of self-reflection and analyzing the situation. One thing that we find in our analysis was the fact that Israel, through its intelligence capabilities, is able to deliver very decisive blows to the axis of resistance. This is something that the Iranian establishment, unfortunately, has failed to mimic on its part. The stolen documents from Israel was, you know, a good thing, but I mean, it was unfortunately eclipsed by the war that was imposed on Iran. Through some, you know, certain sources, I received the second batch, right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, but you know, the war started and I didn't publish it. So here's the thing. Here's the thing when we talk about this. I see people going online and say, I mean, how did the Iranian intelligence community fail so spectacularly? And I think that's a very unfair criticism. And that's why I was very happy that you brought it up. Here's the problem. For example, they smuggled a lot of, you know, anti-tank guided missiles, spike missiles, to Iran. Question becomes, how were they able to import and you know, smuggle so much logistics into the Iran? The people's first reaction is that, well, that was a failure on behalf of the intelligence community. But no. Again, on your previous show, I said that the defeats that we are suffering are mainly due to the bad political decision making. You know, sometimes you say a sentence, but it's the result of dozens of hours of study and research. Why did this happen? Because basically we have a sort of open border policy in Iran. They legalized the smuggling. There are all these people whom we call kulabar. They are individuals who go and cross the borders without any cars or anything like that, with a backpack. And then once they return, in their backpack they bring components that can be used in order to assemble complicated military weaponry. For example, the assassination of Mr. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the Iranian nuclear scientist who was dubbed as the Iranian version of the Oppenheimer, was done very similar through the same method. This legalization of smuggling and this open border policy is basically a political decision which was taken by vetoing the opinion of the intelligence experts. So what do you have here? You have basically, let me draw an analogy here.
Yeah.
Please assume that you have this pool, and two people are competing over this pool. One person is trying to fill it up. The other person is trying to empty it.
Yes.
The person who is filling it up is using a bucket. The other person is using a spoon.
Yeah.
This is a very unfair match to begin with. And that's why I actually went, because I knew what was happening during the 8 hours, the first 8 hours of the war. I knew what is taking place. And I knew that there was some shock and awe factor, the surprise factor in that, which requires, acute analysis in order to understand where we are we are being hit from. And that's why I was pleasantly surprised by how quickly the Iranian intelligence community was able to thwart that, those actions. And it came with enormous help and support of the Iranian people. What Iran did was to basically mobilize its population,
Yes.
the exact opposite of what the Israelis wanted to do.
Yes.
They wanted to bring the Iranians to the street to overthrow the government. But what ended up happening was that Iranians went to the streets, but they went and carried out these patrols on their own without anyone asking them. And then they started making all these calls to the intelligence communities to go and arrest these individuals, which they did, and it was successful. And due to that reason, I say that like this way of framing it, the failure of the intelligence community is not accurate. Again, we have to go back to this sentence, which I'm not saying this lightly. I'm not accusing people lightly. The defeats that we are suffering these days are mostly due to bad political decision making. And people have to sort of do this self-reflection that, many of these politicians that they see that are sort of sympathetic towards West, to what extent the policies that they are advocating are against the national interests of the countries of the region.
Yes. I also want to give some opinion about the bad decision making, right? The people who take the decisions in the region, in Syria, in Iran, in elsewhere, they're human beings. They can hit or miss, right? When the Syrian conflict was still ongoing, I mean, it's still ongoing, but the peak of the conflict in Syria was a few years ago. And when I used to criticize, let's say, decision-making, political, military, or intelligence decisions made by the former government in Syria, I had this always backlash by people who supported the Assad government saying, what are you talking about? Do you know better than the master, or do you know better than our leaders, etc., etc.? And I was like, no, I don't know better. But when you are in the game, if you're a politician and you're in the game, you cannot zoom out and see it from outside. We have the privilege to be outside the game and sometimes see these from the outside. Probably we see things they didn't have the chance to see, or they were briefed wrongly, or they received the wrong advice. It happens. And when you saw some of my posts, I criticized some of the decisions in Iran. I received similar, exact same comments on my streams, on my tweets, people from Iran saying exactly the same thing to me. Like, do you know better than our decision makers? No, I don't know better than your decision makers. And I'm not claiming to, but this is the culture in the region of people trying to not to allow you to be critical because they want you to believe blindly in these decision makings.
Can I have a short comment on this?
Of course.
Look, I'm going through the same thing that you are going through, right? Which is very disheartening. You know, there are statements. It's even sadder inside Iran. And when I say it's inside Iran because I don't claim that I do possess the same kind of knowledge and depth of analysis as you have on the Syrian issues. But there's a statement by the former IRGC chief, Mr. Hossein Salami, who said that once we are unshackled, you will see how we will fight. Unshackled. وقتی که دستانمون باز بشه. Why is he saying that? What is he trying to allude to? The former IRGC officer, not officer, general, the chief of the IRGC, Mohsen Rezai, a few days ago on the Iranian state media, stated that the ones who were claiming that we have to negotiate in order to prevent a war are now going around and basically saying that we should negotiate so that the war ends.
Yes.
And that's what you are seeing here. You know, so there is that kind of gap or not total coordination and sort of synchronous between different components of a government, the military branch versus the political branch. They have different perspectives on the issues. And the problem stems from these people looking at Iran, and many people, even if they are pro-Iran, they will have a very caricature-like understandings of how the political system, the structure inside Iran is functioning. And that's why the usual response that I get from the people is, do you know better than the Iranian leader? We should be supportive of the Iranian leader. How dare you? I love the Iranian leader. Go and see my timeline and how much I post his pictures. And some people even think that I'm sort of like a Stan account and I do not provide, you know, actual analysis on the subjects, that I'm just engagement farming.
Yes.
I like the Iranian leader, but I do also listen to him very carefully. Why is it that in his very first speech, the Iranian leader said that we are going to stand against the imposed war and we are going to fight against the imposed peace as well?
Yes.
What was he seeing? And then you have the statement of the former IRGC general. And then once you put all these things together and the statements, the fact that very quickly after the fact that United States carried out a substantial attack on Iran, we're not referring to how much success they had in attacking Iran, but in the fact that they used a rather sizable fleet in order to target Iran. That attack was substantial in its scale. The fact that they weren't as successful as they wanted to is completely a separate thing. But after everything that has happened, after the senseless war in Iran, you see the Iranian president saying that we are ready to negotiate with United States. What is this? What is this? And once you do not understand that this chasms exist inside the political class, inside different decision makers, you will come to this sort of caricature understanding of Iran that you put everyone together. This is the basic 101 fallacy in the arguments, that you would try to make something very generalized and very vague in order to dismantle the argument of the other person. No, chasms exist. And for those who are saying that, oh, Ehsan, you shouldn't talk about that because the Israelis are listening, they have Unit 8200. Yes. They speak Farsi better than I do.
Yes.
Now they are teaching Iran's study at high school levels. So this delusion that a guy like me that has like 75,000 followers on Twitter, very small and humble account. The fact that they think that my statements would have strategic effects and profound result on the understanding of the Iranian establishment by the Israelis is just, I mean, I'm flattered, but I seriously doubt that.
Hassan, you criticized the ceasefire agreement and you said you would have wished to see Israel punished. However, there is an argument that says this ceasefire agreement is a smokescreen from the Israeli and the US side. For example, one of the commentators, or let's say intellectuals in the US, Steve Bannon, he said, "You saw why Bibi can't be trusted. The ceasefire was as much to save Israel. That's the hidden story. They bit off more than they could chew. Yesterday was brutal for Israeli citizens, especially in Tel Aviv and Beersheba." So it seems also there is an argument that they had to accept this ceasefire agreement in Israel because they were receiving blows inside Israel, especially the human toll. Like, I know that the comparison is there is a big difference between the human toll in Iran and in Israel. However, there is the aspect of people in Israel having two passports, basically, and coming from different places all around the world, and they would be ready to leave if this war continues. Like, if the hypersonic missiles or the ballistic missiles continued falling over Tel Aviv, Haifa, and other cities, then I would assume that the people would have had the urge to leave the country. Unlike many Iranians, as you mentioned, people were gathered in the streets, and there was more, let's say, this national solidarity among them, even among the people who oppose the current government or the Islamic revolution in Iran. I've seen videos of women, for example, they were not covering their heads, and they were calling for a fight against Israel. So there is this also the aspect of the difference of how people feel about their country in Iran and how the people feel about their country in Israel. So in this case, do you see this ceasefire agreement as an opportunity for Israel and the US to regroup, restock their weapons, their air defenses, intelligence operations again against Iran in order to come back in the near future? Personally, I don't believe for a second that this ceasefire agreement will last.
Well, you're 100% on point. I'd like to make a quick comment about something that you mentioned because it's actually very important. The way that they have defined the dynamics within Iran is very flawed. And if you doubt what I said, you can go and see the anger of the Israeli politicians about how the Iranian people didn't overthrow the Iranian government. Mensha Amir, who was the editor-in-chief of Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel. He was the head of the Persian division of the Israeli radio, and he had other positions of power inside Israel. He said that when he talks to the officials in Israel, they're very, very angry about the Iranian people not overthrowing the government, which is the classic case of a government pushing a certain propaganda to the extent that it starts falling victim to its own propaganda.
Yeah.
Today, you have people inside Iran who do not believe in hijab, who might not even be Muslims. They love the Iranian leader. One of them was saying, "خیلی دوست دارم، خیلی غیرت داری," which means that I like you, I love you a lot, because you're zealous, you protect the Iranian people. And that's something that you don't see being mentioned in the foreign outlets or in the mainstream media, even on the alternative media.
Yes.
But going back to what you were saying, the difference in the casualty rate inside Iran and Israel. Karl von Clausewitz, he has a sentence, he has a quote. He says, "War is politics through other means."
Yes.
And you have to understand that even now that we fought against Israel, we were still shackled by the political decisions that were being taken. People might think that this is a bluff. I honestly don't care at this moment because I said the same thing about the Iranian capabilities after October 2024, when we were attacked by Israel. And people said the fact that you don't respond is an indication that you are weak. And back then I was saying the same thing. When people saw the Iranian attacks on Israel, they became very optimistic and they
Yeah.
understood. But still to this day, they do not give the credit to this. And they do think that I'm bluffing. Again, I mean, there is no waking up the people who don't want to be woken up. And I do have to say that this sort of influctuation of the emotions, people going from, oh, we're done, Israel attacked Iran and Iran didn't respond, we are done, the axis of resistance is done, going from that to celebrating on the Iranian missile to the extent that they say, oh, Iran is going to destroy Israel fully. This is not healthy. Like, I'm sorry, but if you have that kind of analysis of the situation, if you tend to, fluctuate in your opinions, this is not a sign of healthy behavior. But with regards to the ceasefire, I'm finally getting to the core of your question. And apologies, because I'm hearing these things a lot.
Exactly.
And you're the only person who is kind enough to give me the time necessary to address these things.
Actually, you're kind enough to elaborate on this stuff because those are a very important and detailed information that many people, even on the alternative media, they don't have the opportunity to learn about all these details. And believe me, so many people want to know this information. So we are grateful.
Thank you. But finally, addressing your own question, there was a session. The reason that I'm against the ceasefire, first of all, I'm not saying that Iran should fight eternally and until the end of times. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm neither delusional about the Iranian capabilities nor about the United States capabilities. United States has the largest air force in the world. It also has the second largest air force in the world in its United States Navy forces. It has considerable capabilities, logistic powers that we cannot really start a fight with them or, escalate in an extent that they would feel the need to get involved fully in the conflict. No, I'm not delusional about that. What I'm merely saying that ceasefire at this point in time was a mistake. And I have, certain arguments for that. I believe that the ceasefire should have been held like 1 or 2 weeks from now. Why? First of all, from the very first moment, despite the fact that the Israelis were trying to overthrow the Iranian government, they had a contingency. I mean, I like the way that the Israelis think in their strategies. Obviously, they're genocidal, and in that regard, I oppose them. But the fact that from the very start, they said that they're not going to fight more than 2 weeks against Iran is very indicative of the way that they think. They had a contingency. And their initial plan was balkanization of Iran. They failed, but they were ready for a ceasefire. And what day we are at the time of the ceasefire? The day 12, right? This is perfectly in alignment with what they had. So the first reason, you have to send a very strong message to them that we are the ones dictating the battlefield, the duration, the dynamics, so that they would understand they might start something, but they might not be able to finish it. You have to make them second guess their strategies. So that's the first thing. I think that the adventurism of the Israelis will not be deterred when they see that they can have a contingency that they can fall on if things go wrong. That's the first thing. Second thing, the ceasefire only started when the oil prices were going up, which is very important for Donald J. Trump.
Yes.
No. Make the United States politicians who were adventurous and very war hawk on Iran to again second guess their strategies. Allow the oil price to go up a little bit. Make them guess. Say that, oh no, we are still considering the closure of Strait of Hormuz. They haven't coordinated with us about the ceasefire. If they want to get that, they have to come to the negotiating table. Bring them to Oman, for example. Carry out a photo shoot. Say that we have brought them to the negotiating table. They started the war, and now they have to beg us for a ceasefire. So use the general diplomacy as well. The third reason, if you listen to the meeting that was held in United Nations Security Council, if you listen to the statements by Secretary General Antonio Guterres and the IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi, for example, Secretary General said, the NPT is the cornerstone of the international law. Iran should fully respect it. He also refrained from condemning United States, but implicitly condemned Iran when it said the region needs peace, but what we are seeing today is the cycle of retaliation after retaliation, which means that, oh no, I'm not going to condemn them for their unprovoked attack, but you using Article 51 of United Nations Charter is problematic.
Yes.
They said this and put an emphasis on, respecting the NPT and the IAEA's inspector or authority on the matter. The Rafael Grossi said similar things. So what's going to happen? They're going to push for the IAEA's inspectors to come to Iran and investigate the Iranian nuclear facilities.
Yes.
The IAEA Director General said that he needs to carry out a damage assessment.
Yes.
Listen to Pete Hegseth's conference about the Operation Midnight Hammer. He says that we can't carry out our battle damage assessment at the moment that we are talking. So the IAEA's inspectors are going to do that for them. And for anyone who thinks that I'm delusional or spouting out conspiracy theories, there's a foreign relations congressional hearing in which a representative by the name of Lawler asks Norman Roll, who was the former national intelligence manager on Iran for CIA.
No.
He says, when he's asked, what is the challenges that the United States has in terms of destroying the Iranian nuclear capabilities, he responds by saying, well, Iran has restricted the access of the IAEA inspector, well, because you guys violated the deal that we had. And because of the lack of access by the IAEA's inspectors, we don't know where we should target and where the sensitive fissile material, the 16% enriched uranium, is located.
Yep.
So now, if the IAEA's inspector come to Iran, they're gonna give it to U.S. military, and they're gonna have their battle damage assessment.
Of course.
Yeah. The third reason that I have with regards to, actually, being opposed to this is the month of Muharram. I do not tend to bring religion into the politics, but it's also important for people to take into consideration the cultural differences and the cultural events that happen in a country. What's Muharram? Muharram is the time that the third Imam of Shias stood against the tyranny of the ruler of the time at the cost of him and his followers being killed, and his family being arrested and taken as prisoners. This is very important. After 1,400 years, Iranians and the Shias still to this day mourn his martyrdom. The fact that when Muharram starts, they would, it would have a profound effect on how Iranians and the Shias in the region would analyze the situation and the conflict between Iran and United States and Israel is very important. And in fact, there was an Israeli journalist or analyst whose name I forgot, but he says that we should end this war before Muharram starts. So, I mean, when you look at their analysis, and then when you look at the analysis on the alternative media, and I do not mean to degrade anyone's opinion, they take into account so many different factors, cultural factors,
Yes.
military aspects, intelligence aspects, the economic aspects. And on the other side, you have just, a bare bones analysis of very simplistic things that are, unfortunately, even in those very bare bones extent that they are being carried out, they're caricature-like, right? So that's another reason. Another reason that I had for being against the ceasefire was the fact that Israel is being supported by United States and NATO. Let's not forget, the NATO chief sent a message to Donald J. Trump, which he boasted about.
Yep.
Their ability to replenish their stock because of the help that they receive from the NATO collective, I would argue is, larger and bigger than the ability of Iran in replenishing its own stock. Iran has made great strides and has been able to achieve many great things. The rate of production of the Iranian missile, the interceptors, the SAMs, has increased greatly. But still, you have to understand they have the support of the collective
Yes.
NATO. And there is one final thing, the separatists.
Yep.
You see the videos of the Kurdish separatists, Pajak, the statement from Pajak, the video of the park, and I believe that they can theoretically activate these terror cells in western and southeastern parts of Iran, and they can engage with the security forces. And obviously, one final thing, Israel has never remained committed to the ceasefires that it has signed with the other parties. And at the time of this recording, they have targeted the Bab al-Sar radar system. A drone was shot down in Hamadan. In multiple cities, the air defense systems were activated, which is perfectly in sync with how the IOF functions.
Exactly. This is the last point I wanted to make, Ihsan, which is the retaliation of Iran against the US after the US carried out a massive attack, basically. We don't know how much damage they have inflicted yet. However, they have sent a big squadron of bombers, strategic bombers, and after that, Iran, second day, I believe, they retaliated by bombing their Al Adid airbase in Qatar, which received minimum damage according to preliminary reports. And in this case, I would like to ask you a few things, basically, and they're all interconnected, one of which is why Al Adid Air Base in Qatar and not other, let's say, bases? And do you believe that in the theory that Iran coordinated with the United States to de-escalate, basically, that you hit us, we hit you, we are done, let's go into ceasefire agreement? It seemed that few hours before the Iranian retaliation against the American base in Al Adid Air Base, the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, and other countries in the region, they already blocked their airspace, which means they had at least an indication or prior knowledge that an attack is going to happen from Iran.
Well, similar thing, just to address something very quickly. Similar thing happened to Iran, in Iran. If you go and see the satellite imagery, Iran closed the entrances of the Fordo facility. Why? Suddenly they have revelation that, something is going to happen? No, the Americans informed the Iranians informed the Americans, there was a back and forth between Iran and United States because neither party wanted to see a larger scale war, right?
Yes.
So in that regard, there's nothing, crazy about that. I was actually very supportive of not carrying out a substantial strike on United States.
Mm.
There are a few reasons. First of all, they already evacuated and sort of moved some of their logistics in the region prior to the Israeli attack on Iran, which would sort of nullify the point of the attack, right? Any attack on them essentially and by its own nature is going to be of an attack and as a damage that would be minimal because they have already took the preliminary actions in order to minimize the damages that were done to them. But there was another reason. As I mentioned, you do not want to go against the United States. If the time comes that you need to fight United States, the Iranian military and the IRGC are fully prepared for those scenarios. But you do not go and start, actively looking for a problem.
Yes.
So that's one thing. And by the way, this is something that I can criticize the Iranian government. I don't know why the Intel fabric inside Tel Aviv is not hit. I do not understand that. That was actually one of the scenarios that I was promoting, Do not attack United States, but attack their interest in Israel. Make the stock market, a little bit unstable so that Donald Trump understand that it cannot engage in his adventurisms. You mentioned, the coordination and the fact that the countries in the region sort of made the phone call even to their residents to evacuate the buildings at the adjacency of the U.S. base.
Was that Al Jazeera? Was that building Al Jazeera? Because the journalists in Al Jazeera, they can see everything happening around the world, but they don't see beyond their nose, which is the Al Hadid Air Base. It's just right there, but they don't see it.
Yeah, but there is a reason why Qatar was used. The fuel tankers that were used in order to refuel the fighter jets for the Israeli attacks on Iran were, mostly being taken off from they took off from Al Udeid base. So it only made sense that the country, the air base that was complicit in the crimes committed by Israel and United States against the people of Iran, that airbase would be the one that would be punished. And just something, because I know that your audience follow the events in northern parts of Iran, the tension between Armenia and Azerbaijan. There is a picture of a separated fuel tank that was dropped in the Caspian Sea, which means that some of the fighter jets actually used the airspace of Azerbaijan in order to carry out the attacks on Iran. But so far we haven't heard anything. I had a little bit of discussion with you about this. I'm not going to repeat them, but I would encourage your audience to go back and listen to the political decision-making criticism that I had of the current Iranian government and understand that probably nothing would change now either.
Yep. I will link this previous interview, guys, also in the description below. You can go back. This was, I believe, 14 days ago. This was 2 days before the US-Israeli attack against Iran. We also spoke about Azerbaijan. My opinion about Qatar is, I would say I'm not the most objective person about it. I have special negative sentiments toward the Qatari regime and Al Jazeera.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. You can't actually, you can't be hostile enough towards Qatar. Like it's very hard to pull off that feat.
Yeah. Yesterday I said, if you put me in a prison and you said you are forced to respect one of these two countries, and that is the UAE and Qatar, right? I would say the UAE, because the UAE, they're at least open about their normalization with Israel, and they're not really pretending to be an axis of resistance, and they don't pretend to be like an anti-Israeli force. They're doing everything in public. Like they're telling you, we're Zionists. We don't like the Palestinians. We want to throw them under the bus. But then the Qataris come and say, they cry rivers and cry. Like this example that I would like to give you. Al Adid Air Base was the advanced operational military base of the United States carrying out its invasion of Iraq in 2003. And in 2003, the day Baghdad has fallen in the hands of the US and British occupiers, on Al Jazeera, the anchor was crying. He was shedding crocodile tears. Like the fighter jets were flying a few meters away from his office, and they were bombing Iraq to occupy it, and he was crying. So this is the duplicity which I hate. Just be honest. Just be honest with your approach, and that's why I call them the fifth column in the region, and that's how they have infiltrated many of the actors in the axis of resistance, including Hamas, Hezbollah. That's why they rebuilt many towns and cities in Lebanon after 2006 invasion of Lebanon, because they wanted to gain influence and leverage. And the people started posting pictures everywhere. Thank you, Qatar. Thank you, Qatar. But this is the soft penetration of the popular base of Hezbollah. And then they turned against Hezbollah in 2011. And this is just expected what happened. That's why I always say my opinion is not as objective as it should be, especially that they also destroyed my country. But Ihsan, this is an amazing insight. Thank you so much for coming, for the opportunity you give us, the time you dedicate for me and for the audience of Syriana Analysis. We appreciate you all. Guys, his X account and also his Telegram account are in the description below. Hit him a follow so that you also read and listen to what Ihsan believes and his perspective about not only Iran, but also the broader geopolitical conflicts in the region. I wish you a great day, guys. I wish you peace. Peace be upon you, upon your families, and peace be upon you, Ihsan. And I will see you soon.
Assalamu alaikum.